hi to all the 46 participants, which some of you will have heard is a record. Given that we've only had one other meeting, this is a record to be broken, but it's very satisfying. And normally I'd start by introducing everybody, but really I will apologize on behalf of, I'm going to apologize on behalf of the cyber network, because the 5 of us had a meeting, everything was fine, everything checked out. We have no idea what has happened. But let us move on. The topic for today is collecting and real life. What does a collector do? How can collecting stamps help in life? My short answer is collecting stamps is a stress reducer, which has kind of flunked for tonight, but Bob is now with us. Bob is here, as I mentioned briefly. He's here as president of the Kingston Stamp Club, which is a very dynamic group, lots of people. And he has also recently retired from a very highly respected career in social work. So he not only knows all about stamp collecting from the Kingston Stamp Club, but he knows all sorts of things about human behavior. So he's going to lead us off. And then after that, David and Sam have both had very distinguished philatelic careers, which in different circumstances I would tell you all about, but that would steal their thunder because they are going to tell you about their philatelic careers. So I would just give a couple of teasers to say that David Hobden is president of the Postal History Society of Canada and is about to appear on television with regard to one of his covers. And Sam is the first Canadian to win the Sapphire Award from the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors for exhibiting in 20 different national level stamp shows across Canada and the USA. And he has lots of interests. He's going to tell us about them. David's going to tell us about his covers. But first of all, Bob, I hope you are still there.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, wonderful.
We don't see you at the moment, but we can hear you.
All right.
But can you give us your thoughts about what does a collector do and how can collecting stamps help in life?
Okay, I'm delighted to be part of this group, and I am a novice collector compared to the members of the panel and yourself, Chris. I've only been collecting for 7 years. So I'm going to do a bit of an overview and talk about what a collector does. And I want to make the distinction between what a collector does and how do they get into collecting stamps as opposed to collecting coins or vintage cars or tablespoons, whatever. So in order to understand that and then understand why stamp collecting is so important and so useful and so helpful, we need to take a step back and say, well, what were the roots or the pathways or the motivation or the encouragement that got people into stamp collecting as opposed to all the other hobbies? And I think there are 4 different pathways that exist. They're not mutually exclusive, but there's overlap. But if you go through each one of them, it gives us a sense of how people got into stamp collecting in the first place. What was the attraction? So the first one is what I've called the significant other influences. In other words, in our lives, our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, our neighbors, somebody who had a significant relationship with us, encouraged us to go into stamp collecting. And in my case, my father, when I was 10 years old, encouraged me to get into stamp collecting. I have 4 grandchildren, 2 of whom are collectors. Mikey, who's 8 years old and lives in Ottawa, and his sister, Maya, who's 10, both collect stamps and got into it because of my encouragement. My other 2 grandchildren, I tried to encourage them both, but that lasted about 10 seconds. So significant other is really an important rule to go. The second area is what I call the tangible influence. What is it about stamps that attracts people? And it is the stamp itself that attracts people. People will talk about the colors, the design, the thematic aspects of the stamp, the different kinds of things that they could collect, like birds, like airplanes, like sailboats. And then the whole area of trying to develop a greater understanding of history, that there is so much in a stamp that explains the geopolitical forces in a country, the history of the country. And I think a little later on, both Sam and Dave will be able to explain some of that in much more detail. In my club, I have, I'll give you 2 members, one of whom has been collecting for about 65 years, and he'd been a collector of Commonwealth stamps. And at some point during that time, he developed an interest in turtle images on stamps. And he, from there, has collected, I would probably say, one of the most comprehensive collections of turtle stamps anywhere in North America, which is really it's really neat. Another fellow in the club put together a collection of images of Winston Churchill as a present for a friend. It's a whole complete album on Winston Churchill. So it's just, there are so many different things that you can do with collecting. So the third item is what I've called the psychological influence or the therapeutic influence of collecting stamps. And so what does collecting stamps do for you from a point of the psychology or the therapeutic side? And clearly, stamp collecting can alleviate stress. It can allow you to focus. It gives you a sense of pride as you watch your collection grow, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment. And in my case, I had a very demanding job, particularly in the last 2 years, and I was very stressed. And when I left my job and retired, I got back into stamp collecting, and I found that it really helped me. I was much more relaxed. I could focus. I felt like I was getting back to feeling much more comfortable and beginning to enjoy it all. So that's really important. The other part of the therapeutic side is that you can, when you join a club, I collected for 2 years by myself, thought I knew it all. I joined the club, and then I realized that I was a novice, that I had a lot of things I needed to learn about stamp collecting. And I found that I was really enjoying the social aspect of collecting and being with a group of people who collected and sharing information, sharing interests. And in our club, if I was to take a poll and say to members, what is it you like about collecting and being a member of the club, they would say 2 things. One is we really like the sales, but we equally like the social aspect of it, the ability to meet with our colleagues, to talk about stamp collecting is a very social part of collecting. And I think that that's really important. Those qualities that I mentioned about being comfortable and being alleviate stress, being able to focus, those kinds of qualities are really what you would call an enduring quality, so that they'll move on in your life and stay with you. So that it is that part of it that's enjoyable, that goes on further. And the fourth one, the final one, is a bit of a joke, but it's some people get in it because they want to make money. And I don't know that too many that do make money, but it is part of the motivation. I think for some people, it's probably very difficult to do. So that's kind of the summary of how people might get into collecting. I turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. That's lots to think about. So, David, you get to follow that. Perhaps with comments about which of those you most relate to, and then get into what do stamp collectors do, and how you've gone from collecting stamps to be, well, I hope more than 15 seconds of TV fame, but we'll be interested to hear your route.
I never told you that. I don't know where you heard that, but we'll get there. Well, something that Bob touched on that I've always said is that very few of us would be doing this if we were doing it in a vacuum. You know, we all do it, enjoy the fellowship, we enjoy the camaraderie. You know, it's nice to see everybody's faces, but it's not the same as getting to say hello in person. So now you alluded to the fact I was president of the Postal History Society. Thank you very much. We've run up until last year, the last 3 years prior to that, an annual event, the symposium. And some of you will have heard about it. Many of you will have been to parts of it. And we've enjoyed that, but we've set it up specifically to highlight the time spent together. We spend, instead of just a weekend where we're all at the Bourse, we have 3 days leading up to it where we're at different events, and we have nothing to do but enjoy the historical events and venues that we see and chat and enjoy each other's company. So that's not what got me started, but without that, none of us would be doing this. As a kid, I was one of those kids that got an ambassador stamp album one year at Christmas and put stamps in it from all over the world. And I love the colorful Eastern European stamps. I didn't know what a CTO was. I hinged those right in alongside the used stuff I had. I was disappointed with Canada's stamps. Our commemoratives, very few, are definitives, you know, very few flashy stamps as a kid growing up in the 60s. The one I always wanted was that World War II tank stamp, which I never did get a copy of. So fine, you grow up, you go to school, you get married, and something catches your attention to get back into it. Now, in discussing how to do this, I said to Chris, I said, well, why don't I just tell people about what it's been like as my journey as a collector and how I've gone from, you know, small queens and stamps into covers, into postal history, and finally into military postal history. And so at school, I was at Waterloo, and we had a stamp shop downtown, Harold Beaupre Stamps. And I started to get back into it. And I looked at what to do, and I wasn't going to collect one of every, but I saw these things, the small queens. And at the time, the Scott catalog was 1/4 of an inch thick, and it had very little information about it. And I learned relatively quickly, while most people would be willing to give you an answer on something as difficult as the small queens, not all of them are qualified to provide such answer. And so you spend a lot of time chasing your tail. But at first I thought I liked the fact that there was a set of them. Oh, I can collect the whole set. I can collect the, you know, the 12 and a half pence, or the 12 and a half perf copper red mint. Little did I realize that this isn't, one, it's not a complete, defined, definitive set with a given number of stamps, and two, there's a lot more to it than that. But what it did do is it picked my brain on some of the more complex issues of small queens. Richard, are you out there listening? I'm alluding to Richard Thompson. If you've ever seen one of Richard's exhibits, you'll know how complex these are and how seriously some of us take them and took them. And so I began to learn that the stamps were printed over 30 years, long before we had anything, you know, like the controls, industrial control we have now. Colors and shades and perfs and papers were all over the place, and they created a bunch of different stamps, and that by studying these, you could learn about them. Well, when I first started, I had to learn what a vertical paper from a horizontal paper was. And I was having trouble with this and a little bit limited. And one day I went to a fellow that's no longer with us, Stan Lum, and I had 4 8-cent small queens, and I had them arranged according to the colors on the Scott catalog page. And I showed these to Stan at the show, and I proudly had this set up, and I was going to label each of these as my de facto copy of that shade as soon as Stan said, yes, you got them right, David. And Stan instead told me what part of my anatomy, what room of the house to use that page of the catalog on. And he sent me a copy of an article by Shoemaker that most of us have done small queens have had at one point. And I continued with that, but that opened up more of the interest for me. It was something that was complex. It was something that took some time. And if you're a neophyte with small queens, the difference between a 37 and a 41, the Ottawa and Montreal printings, when you finally can pick those out without having to struggle with them, that's a milestone. So I got to doing that, and there was some big collectors, and I was on a very limited budget at the time, and so I was dealing with something I could work with, and that's something we have to take into account too. When you're a student, a university student, your budget's pretty small. You pick something that you can work with and you can enjoy and have fun at it. And you can excel. You can make a niche for yourself in learning these things and knowing them. And Bill Simpson, who's long gone now, was a fabulous collector who was in Chatham, not far from where my in-laws were from. So when I went down to Sarnia, I'd pop down to Bill's, and sometimes I'd stay overnight, and we'd go on. We'd have stamp weekends down there, and enjoyed the fellowship and enjoyed the learning as well. So I went from the small queens and then into more of a conventional type of collecting, where you're collecting the mint of them, but it wasn't everything for me. And then one day I was actually at the Milton show, and a dealer there had a bunch of stampless covers. I knew very little about these, but they were so cheap and old, and I thought, oh, these are 150 years old and they're $20 or $10. So I bought a few of them and I started to learn. I started to learn about the roots, rates, and how the rates worked, and all the minutiae of that. And I started to get into more and more of that. And history had always been an interest of mine, military history. In the 80s, when my wife and I went to Europe, I dragged her through every World War I, World War II Canadian site that I could cause her to visit. And I enjoyed that. Actually, she did too, so I didn't have to drag her very far. I always enjoyed that aspect of it, but I also enjoyed the local history. And for us in Southern Ontario, and in fact in most of Canada, with a little bit less so in Quebec, where I'm sitting in Milton now, 200 years ago was nothing. And so that the history of what's here isn't that long. And yet in Halton County, most of the little villages, and at one point there was 41 separate post offices in this county. Most of those villages still exist, and they may only still exist as a road with a closed down gas station, but you can still point them out. And at one point, those were all communities that were self-sufficient. Before the advent of the automobile, so you might live and die and hardly ever leave that little community. And I found that very interesting. And so I started to collect local postal history, and I found it fascinating. You'd have a little town and you'd find a cover from it. And some of these towns, the covers I have from them now are the only artifacts that are known to exist from, for example, St. Anne, the earliest town in Halton County. When you get deeper down that rabbit hole, some of the contribution of that study goes to shore up the rest of the local historical studies as well. And so with my interest in military history and stamp lists, and the fact that there really wasn't anybody doing some of the big, doing the early Canadian military material, and there had been a couple of sales and some material came available, it worked out to be something that was attainable for me, and not on purpose at first. You know, I'd buy a few pieces here, a few pieces there. When Steinhardt's sale went by, I really wasn't collecting that hard and pretty well ignored it, much to my chagrin over the years later. But I've been able to pick these things up, and I've known enough about the settings that they're in to be able to add some research to what's going on. And when we're studying history from 200 years ago or 100 ago, typically we pick a book up and read what somebody has summarized for us of their thoughts. But when you have a cover from an action in the War of 1812 or any other time, instead of having the summary, you've actually got the primary resource, and you've got a little snapshot of something that went on. You may have only been writing home to say hi to mom, but you've got a snapshot of where that guy was at that time in that activity. You can research it. Instead of researching from the top down, you're researching from the bottom up. And so it's a different type of thing. And I've enjoyed that part of it. Now, I also wanted to highlight something that is a detriment to so many of us, myself included. The adage of accomplishment versus perfectionism. And I want to encourage all of us not to be too badly bitten by that perfectionist bug that doesn't allow us to want to put pen to paper until you're satisfied that you know darn well everything on that topic, and that you're not going to have to add something later. You're not going to realize later that I didn't research that little piece of it. I didn't answer those little questions. And I want to just say that if you don't put down what you know, the next group of collectors, the next generation of collectors won't even have that. And I wanted to sort of state that in my study of local history, local postal history, through military history, there's an awful lot that I need to say, as has been said before, that I have, but trying to be perfect about it has prevented me from doing it. So I want to encourage you to take the accomplishment that you've got in putting something together and share it with everybody else versus waiting until you're complete. So what Chris alluded to, somebody got in touch with me that in Nova Scotia, they're putting together a group out there. Company is doing a little antiques roadshow, effectively, of Nova Scotian military history. And they got in touch with me, and I said, yes, I have some things. As a matter of fact, I'm working through one of them right now. What I was working through was a correspondence of 18 letters written during the Revolutionary War from a lieutenant on a ship called HMS Blonde, which was a British frigate captured by the French during the 7 Years' War and operating out of the Halifax station for 15 of those 18 letters. And so each one of these letters, he's writing back to his wife and talking about what's going on. So while we can research, you can research the Revolutionary War as a whole and its effect on Canada. You can research the British Royal Naval Station out of Halifax during the war. but here we've got an opportunity to look over a guy's shoulder when he's writing home to his wife of serving in the Royal Navy during that. So I'm supposed to go to Halifax at the beginning of next month. I'm gonna have to wait and see whether they're gonna let me or not. I'm not gonna quarantine for 14 days to get down there. So anyway, so I think that's about it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them later.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
David, thank you very much. There was a lot of things there which I would relate to in my own journey, but I do just want to comment on your remark that as a kid growing up in Canada in the 60s, you were disappointed with the Canadian stamps. Add that as a kid growing up in Britain in the 1960s, I thought the Canadian stamps were wonderful. You know, Mounties, mountains, polar bears, Jack Cartier on a great big stamp fighting. They were awesome. So
all I got on my mail was the definitives, Chris. I never got Mounties or Herd or any of those ones. So
yeah.
Well, next time we get together, I'll bring some doubles so we can trade.
Okay, Sam, you too started off as a kid like Bob and David and I collecting stamps. And could you tell us about your journey?
So I teach, and I use PowerPoint to teach. Chris, you teach as well. So let's go with this. But just to follow up on what Bob and David has been saying, yes, grandfather on my mother's side, and so is my dad, big collectors, got me to collect. And typically the lifespan, or the track is when you're young, you collect. So then you go to university, you're interested in, girls, really. So of course after I get married, then I find out what do I do with myself. So that's when I start to collect. So again, a lot of what Bob say fits me to a T. Actually, when I was young, I got into an accident and I fell and I fainted and so on and so forth. And as a young kid, when you're used to going to school every day, while you are the only kid on the street not going to school, you feel bored. That's why my dad told me a thing which this resulted. He said, you have to get yourself a hobby. Otherwise, So I did. So I went, crazy the other way. So here we go. Everybody, Joe, could you see fine? Okay, so collecting in real life. For those who don't know, I'm the vice president of the Royal, would be for a couple more years. And I'm also fellow of a couple other societies. So collecting to me, just like David, I did stamps. And then, you transition. And just like David, I start collecting stampless covers. So it was probably around the same time as you did, David. It was in the 1980s when I first bought my stampless Hong Kong covers. Back then, nobody, there's no stamps on it. So nobody wants it. So I was able to get it at a decent price. So that's how I migrated into postal history. So one of the topics that, this is more like a passion for me. And it started off with around 30 years ago when I caught up on this topic. And it is the story of the World War I Chinese Labor Corps. So this is a totally hidden story, which I've been trying to promote in the past 20, 30 years, as you see. For the long and short of it, there was 145,000 or so Chinese labor who were shipped to work in World War I Europe, behind enemy lines. How close the enemy lines, as you see, because we think that roughly 10% of the 145,000 never made it home. They were killed doing action and even after the fact. And the other fact is that 85,000 were sent from China to Victoria. Yes, our Victoria, BC, in CP ships. And then those were transported in secret train. They were sealed secret train, and there is a code name for this train, which is Silk, S-I-L-K, Silk trains. Now, there is no postal history from that, but 85,000 of those transfers the whole of Canada all the way from Victoria to Halifax before they were shipped to ships in France. I asked you, how many Canadians do you think have heard about things like that? So very few, but we're trying to change that. Because of this, I'm not a historian by training. I don't have a history degree. So it's the postal history item. Once I get the cover, I start digging. I start the research there. And there was an international conference in Weihai where most of the labor was recruited there. This was in 1917, 18, 19. And when they had an international conference, I went there to speak on this particular subject. I was the only person to speak on this particular subject. So I was essentially using postal history to show history. And it was just, I find that to a lot of people, using postal history is way above their head. They have no idea what I'm talking about. So what I arrange I haven't, in some of my parts of my exhibit is those on the first page, the top cover is the only registered cover. And you can see on the bottom, it says Chinese Labor Corps, and it says number 179 company. So for every Chinese company of laborers, that roughly is 500 in number, they're usually an officer and a couple of British sergeants that runs it. And the rough split between the 145,000 laborers, roughly 85,000 or so was controlled by the British, where the rest of them were in munition factory. They were in the ports in south of France. They were working everywhere in France. So there is two major streams of the laborers. And this is one of the covers. When they sign up, the laborers, when they sign up, it's a 3-year duty, a tour of duty. When they signed up, they went to Weihai. And the first thing they did after they were accepted, because they actually went through medical checks and so on, which for those who have seen the book, Harry Livingston, Forgotten Men, Harry Livingston is a Canadian military doctor who actually went to Weihai to clear the laborers before they were accepted. Their family would receive this cover. This is the front and back. This would be their first payment of the laborers' pay. And in there as well is a pay book. Now, the British was really meticulous in setting this up. They actually printed formula covers. The small one on this side, there's very few register, is given to the laborers family. The laborers family, if they want to write their loved ones in France, they would use this, France or Belgium, they would use this, address it to Weihai, where the Chinese Labor Corps is, and then that would get into the British military system and send over to Europe. Now, on the other side, the laborers on the battlefront would use a larger cover, and then they would then be transported back the same way and put in the mail in China to send to their loved ones. Now, this occurs with and without stamps. So within the Chinese postal system, they also allowed that to happen. This is a pretty scarce animal, which is camp to camp. How does the laborers communicate with each other? And as far as I know, this is only one of 2 letters that have survived. And after they were repatriated, the British was really happy with their performance. And the British War Medal, you know, was the one that in bronze version, because the other ones are all silver coated, and the bronze version are only given to the Chinese laborers. So they were awarded, and this is the cover. This is only one of 3 known that the covers that have survived that were sent. So you could even get yourself involved. Like I said before, 2006, I was in there. Yes, Chris, I was on TV 2006. So I was in Chinese TV all over, but that's another story. So 2006, when I went there to Weihai, I said, guys, look, in Weihai, the biggest thing since white bread is this Chinese Labor Corps. Then they agree. And in 2008, they actually made a whole international conference. And I was the first speaker. In 2018, they made a Chinese Labor Corps museum, and I was presenting. So you could really get involved. You know, the depth of it is you decide. Another topic, by sheer coincidence, David, I'm into military just like you. So this is Canada's Sea Force in Hong Kong. Again, we're using postal history, and in this case, ephemera, to show history. So the details is unknown to most Canadians. Yes, we know that there were some Canadians who were sent to Hong Kong before the war and they were stuck there. So again, this what I really like for this topic was the use of the ephemera. So we go into this thing called social philately. So to start off with, the forerunners, before they were Sea Force. So Canada sent roughly 2,000 soldiers over to Hong Kong. And one of the battalions is the Winnipeg Grenadiers. And I was showing this particular cover when they were sent as Y Force. When once the war started, September 1939, the British was called back to the British Isle, and Canada was sending soldiers to mend, sensitive areas like the jail guards and so on. So the Winnipeg Grenadier was sent over to do this. So this one actually has a letter, and this particular gentleman was then sent. They returned to Winnipeg in September of 41. By October 27, they were already on a ship from Vancouver going to Hong Kong. The next cover is an arrival in Hong Kong. So they arrived on November 16 in Hong Kong, and which was only roughly like 2 weeks before, well, more than 2 weeks. On December the 8th, the Japanese invaded Hong Kong. So what we can learn from this is we could see the censor, we could see the person who was sending it, because Private Callis have his name on the back. Private Callis was killed on December 21st. So the sad thing was, by the time this particular cover arrived in Canada, the Private was already dead. From the research currently, we only could record something in the area of 11 days. There was only 11 days that the Canadian start to send letters before these letters were blocked. This is another one, and this has the famous so-called detained in Hong Kong marking. Those of us who collects it call those the detained covers. And the 2 units were the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada. Each was assigned a triangular British marking. It's a British Army sensor marking. And 137 is for the Winnipeg Grenadiers. 136 is for the Royal Rifles of Canada. 138 is assigned to headquarters. So there's not that many of them because, like I said, there was only 11 days that they were able to send the letters, and the rest was trapping. So another one I was able to show was what happened when their families send their letters. So this particular one was October 31st. The ship left Vancouver on October 27th. And on October 31st, covers were sent to them, but they never got them. And they never got that because, and it was blocked and was returned in April of 42. Now then I show when they were POWs in Hong Kong. So as usual, I could trace who the writer is, and then in this case, the Japanese censor as well. So we could see the Japanese censor, and the Japanese actually selected strong bodies, and they were sent in 3 different shipments between 42 to 45 to work as slave laborers and forced laborers in Japanese mines, munitions, So one on this particular cover actually was sent to Hong Kong, while the other one was actually sent to Japan because the POW have been moved to Japan by then. I was lucky to buy one of the notebooks from one of the POWs, and it's just like 30 or 40 pages of address, autographs, drawings. So this is where I said that, if I show this, should I be showing this particular, this little book in there as well? Then there are other ephemeras. Now, another correspondent I bought, the particular person have on 4 pieces of paper, half papers, a name list, the casualty list of who was killed in action during the first day of the battle, which was December 19th or so. And then the capitulation was December 25th. And so this is really moving stuff because you could tell he didn't even have a pen. He was using pencil to record those while he was a POW. There is an official book that they have, but of course I would not be the one owning it. When they returned, the Winnipeg Grenadiers was actually greeted at the train station. One of it is at the Winnipeg train station, and they were given this one. Another item of ephemera is that the airlines was airdropping announcement, bilingual, one side English, the other one Japanese, to tell the POWs. At the corner you see in red pen, it says October 18. So October 18, 1945 was when this particular person received it and his POW. And the other side is actually slightly different wording because it's supposed to be to the Japanese captors that, guys, Japan surrender, you guys better surrender. So again, it depends on how far, like David was saying, this rabbit hole you want to get into. So there's still 5 surviving members of the 4C, and I met one of them at one of his book. It's his 3rd book signing ceremony. So this is where real life comes in, because now this Hong Kong Veteran Commemorative Association, this is actually a Canadian association, made up of Canadians, the relatives, the associates, anybody who's interested would join this association, which I'm a member. So I'm presenting this particular topic to them in May. Another thing that Bob alluded to is the stamps look great. It could be a sailboat, it could be a turtle. And what got my goat was it's a frog and a toes. So I have this frog and toads exhibit. Now, it's one thing collecting them, but when you start to exhibit them, you need to arrange it in a logical way and to present it in exhibition we call it treatment. So I have to learn everything and figure out a way that I could logically and attractively, I hope, to present it. So I use this particular angle. I use how frogs affect humans in terms of arts, literature, animation, and what are the implications of frogs and toads to our future. So this is on one of the pages where I try to use stamps with different artifacts. It may be a stone carving, it may be a metal thing, it could be anything that civilization uses frog to represent in the arts. Another thing is I went to dig up what literature in history that uses frogs to describe. So, and I was able to track some, decent material and to present. Of course, nowadays it's not literature; it's called animation. So that is easy to find because who doesn't know Kermit the Frog? And lastly, for frogs, it's because they're very delicate species. A lot of the species are actually becoming endangered. So they are actually a thermometer of how we as human is destroying the environment. So my thought was, okay, this was, before it was very nice and so on. Then of course, the fire, the fire and the pollution that we're causing to something like a black and white. We're wiping out ourselves. So another exhibit I use is postcard. And this is very, I learned that when you collect postcard, like if you're a coin collector, how do you exhibit coins, And I know because somebody tell me how they would exhibit their military medals. So, but for a postcard, for a postcard collector, it is only the philatelic societies, the APS, and now the FIP experimental class would let you allow you to use postcard to tell a story. No other society have this structure. So this is one of my my exhibit, my Chifu card. I use essentially 5 frames, uh, roughly 13 years of the development of this particular town, particular city in North China, to tell the story, how it developed, how internationalized it is. And I'm, I'm the guy who does on this day in history from the Royal. If you see those posting, it is me. So I argue that, with stamps, this is real life, this is history. I brought this particular stamp up for a couple of reasons, because I was a guy who suggested to when I was sitting on the stamp advisory committee, when the International Year of the Chemistry comes up, that my past professor, Professor Polanyi, be considered for this stamp. So it was great to see that he was indeed accepted. So in closing, I'm saying I encourage everybody to collect, and from the collection, you will learn, you see things all around you, because otherwise you won't know about it. And, then you could share your passion in terms of exhibiting or just showing people. Because more and more, I find that we are becoming more and more narrow vision, tunnel vision, where we confine ourselves to only a few sources for information. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Sam. And What strikes me about all this is what a wonderful hobby philately is, as it runs the full gamut from me collecting pretty pictures of mounties and mountains as a 10-year-old, right the way up to Sam presenting at an international conference, and Bob's on television, or David's on television too. And Bob, are you, I hope you're still there.
I am.
Great. Any thoughts about everything, having just heard the other two presenters, before we move into general comments?
Well, it just shows what an incredible depth in history you can get. It's just incredible particularly what Sam has done. It's amazing. It's amazing. You should be very proud of that, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you. It's just a passion. So.
Okay, well, I'm now doing the moderating of panelists, and we have a compliment to everybody, great presentations, and no questions. So, Joe, is this the time to open up the show, and we'll see if anybody, we'll see everybody's faces, and if you have any questions, I will flip between the screens and wave your hand, and we will have a conversation.
I will start promoting everyone, and I have to do it one at a time, so give me a moment.
Okay, and I will say thank you very much to Bob and David and Sam. And I'm also going in the midst of all my notes to give a plug for the next panel, which is going to be in March, and that is called Moving Beyond Collective. Why would I want to? What are some areas to collect? And that is on Monday, March the 16th. And Joe, does everybody who registered for today get an automatic invitation, or do people have to register again?
They'll have to register again, and anyone that wants to go on a monthly list, they can send me an email at stamptalks at kpex22.org, and I will add them to a list, and every month I will automatically send them the registration link so they can register.